So this takes us to communism in China. The Communist Party came to power in China with organizational strength and also public legitimacy, thanks again to the ideology that it was able to spread, and also to the lack of legitimacy of the preceding regime. Maya, can you take that away from Sasha, please? She's chewing on your toy. Take it away. Tell her no. Sorry. But again, they didn't have this template to follow. And so they modeled themselves after the Soviet Union. So this meant nationalization. It meant collectivization. It meant central planning, the entire economic system based on central planning. And it meant the use of terror. Because remember, at this point when Mao comes to power, Stalin's been in power since the 1920s. And so we're talking about, 30 years nearly of 25, 30 years of already being in power. So this was really the Stalinist framework that they took after. The 20th Party Congress was actually so within 6 years, the Soviets had their 20th Party Congress, within 6 years of China adopting communism. And so this same sort of thing, as they were following the Soviet example, was mirrored within China with the 100 Flowers campaign in 1956. And this was a period when public criticism and dissent were considered good things. But one thing that they felt is that the USSR went really too far. And they didn't want to go nearly as far as the USSR did. So they broke with the Soviets by launching in 1958 the Great Leap Forward. The idea was to become the stronger communist country. And this is the beginning of a lot of tense relations with the Soviet Union. Sorry. So what the Great Leap Forward involved was breaking up the economy into little communes, which each set their own policies. And so that's the picture that you see on the left, these people living in one of these communes. This was officially China's second 5-year plan. So again, following the sort of Soviet template, although it was never actually completed. Now, what it did is, by the end of the first year, it divided the country up into 25,000 communes, each of which had about 5,000 households. No one got paid anymore. You just earned what they called worker points or work points, which were then redeemable for goods. Maya, can you go take this a little bit further away? So the picture that you see here are people eating in a communal kitchen. Everything was communal. And in fact, so you had neighborhood kitchens. You would just go along with thousands of other people. You would just go and you'd eat off their dishes and you'd leave the dishes, and that was it. And in part, that was because Mao had hoped to make China a huge steel producer, a bigger steel producer than the United Kingdom. And so he created these small home-style steel furnaces throughout the neighborhoods. And Maya, can you please go over there? Please. Thank you. And I'm sorry. This wouldn't happen in class, would it? And wood was taken out of people's houses to fuel these steel furnaces. But also all the scrap was collected by forcing people to turn in things like pots and pans. And so they had no reason for these anymore because they had these communal kitchens. Sorry, the puppy and the little girl are fighting. I'm just going to pause this for a second. Hold on. Okay, sorry, that was like a half a second for you guys, but it was like 10 minutes for me. So you had this entire communal policy going on during the Great Leap Forward. But again, people were taken off their land. They were taken away from the normal work that they were doing, and they were reconstituted in these communes. And a combination of these policies, you had all this labor going into metallurgy. But also you had poor weather, you had low crop yields, so people who were actually working the farmers on the farms were doing really badly, and the result was a catastrophe. And so by the 1960s, they ended up rolling back parts. This ended fairly quickly, 1960, and then throughout the 1960s, they rolled back huge parts of this, like collectivization. So the lack of organizational capacity, the lack of know-how, and some of this bad luck, like the bad weather, led to lots of disorder and a catastrophic famine. So officially, about 14 million people died during this period, and there are estimates that anywhere from 20 to 40 million people died during this period. So this was, in a lot of ways, I guess it followed the same sort of pattern that we saw in the Soviet Union, where collectivization was also responsible for the death of so many people, and the reorganization of life, life or death, as it may be, did so many bad things. Now, what's interesting is that, again, trying to stay clear of the Soviet Union. Let's not condemn anyone. Let's not say that everything was bad. We had a problem with the Great Leap Forward, thought Mao. And so what we need is a revolutionary answer. And so what Mao does is he re-centralizes power, and he wants to go more radical. And this is the beginning of Mao's cult of personality, where he publishes the little red book of Mao's sayings, and that's what everybody here is holding, the little red book. And this launches the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, also known as the Cultural Revolution, which goes on from 1966 to 1976. And it was really led by student radicals, aka the Red Guard. The goal here was to finish the revolution. And in a way, they were trying to recover revolutionary roots. So they were reactionaries of a sort, going back, a decade and a half, 2 decades, trying to go back to the revolutionary roots. And Mao claimed that the liberal bourgeoisie was trying to bring back capitalism. And so what you needed was this cultural revolution to get rid of all the vestiges of the past. And they wanted the abolishment of what they called the 4 olds. Old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas. Customs, culture, habits, and ideas. These were the 4 olds. And so the youth hears this calling. They form these Red Guards, these groups around the country. They're later joined by the military, by urban workers, by the party leadership. But this was really led by the youth and universities, etc. And you have numerous waves of purges of the party at various levels. Even leaders of the Communist Party are purged. And so again, this should be reminiscent of something that we saw in the Soviet Union, which is, sorry, chaos with the puppy, which was the purges just go out of control. If you recall, I mean, Stalin decimated his military as Germany was rearming itself. And the same thing sort of happens here. The thing is that these were a bunch of, it's like, what's that movie? Oh, I can't believe the book we all read in like 7th grade, Lord of the Flies. There's a bunch of crazy kids. And they're out of control. And Mao eventually fears that they're going to destroy the entire system. You've got this chaos. You've got this threat to the party power. And so he sends in the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, to bring back order. And so more or less by 1968, you have the culmination of this cultural revolution. During the Cultural Revolution, there are numerous ancient buildings and artifacts that are destroyed because these are part of the 4 olds, of course. The economy grinds to a halt. The most educated are those who are killed or imprisoned. They're seen as a threat. So between 500,000 and 2 million people are killed during the Great Cultural Revolution. There's a great movie on this, and I always forget what it's called. Someday I'll remember, and I'll post it. I'll tell you I'll do something. But a great movie walking through this. That didn't help you at all. So let's go into modern China's development. Let me just do a quick pause. Okay. So 2.5-year-olds shouldn't train puppies. It sounds sort of medieval in there. Okay, so back to modern China's development. Deng Xiaoping was actually one of the victims of the Cultural Revolution. He lost his post. He was thrown out, and I don't believe he was actually imprisoned or anything, but he did lose his post. But he eventually consolidates power after Mao's death in 1976. And by 1979, he's the one who's standing up there emphasizing reform, trying to liberalize the economy, allowing for more private business, private agriculture, opening up to foreign investment, to foreign trade. Politically, the Communist Party is still in charge, but the reforms, at least at first, begin to lessen poverty in the country. And so they're seen as a great thing. But pretty soon, over the 1980s, you have increased inflation, unemployment, corruption. Corruption. Ooh, that sounds ominous, doesn't it? And it should sound ominous, because what you have is 1989, you have this pent-up anger, and this leads to the events in Tiananmen Square, where 1 million people go out demanding Chinese glasnost. Because what did they have? They had a Chinese perestroika before perestroika even happened in the Soviet Union. But then, 10 years later, they still hadn't had any form of glasnost. And the glasnost is what was happening for the last 5 years in Russia as well. So people saw this happening, and they were angry. So 1 million people come out, hundreds are killed, thousands are arrested and exiled. And this is really so they step down. They say there won't be a glasnost. And so this is what you have in China, really lasting up till today. Economic liberalization, but political control under the Communist Party. The state isn't horribly repressive for most people, but for those political oppositionists, it can be. And this can involve anything from imprisonment, forced exile, or execution. So again, something to keep in mind is what we're talking about in China is perestroika without glasnost. And that's what we continue to see today. But that was the trend that was set by Deng Xiaoping. So the Communist Party, the way that it actually functions is what's known as democratic centralism. The majority at the highest level rule. So at the highest level in the Politburo, a majority decision. So it's sort of democratic at that level. But then whatever they come up with is imposed on the rest of the country. So a handful of people are imposing something on 1.3 billion, minus a handful. The Communist Party controls the state through appointments and firings of people to public positions. There are 10 million of them. This is the Chinese nomenclatura. Remember this special elite group that has the premium state positions in the state economy and also in the state bureaucracy. It's the same as in the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, where every government position has a Communist Party organ that goes along with it and supervises it to ensure they're functioning within the interests of the party. So leaders generally rely on informal connections, and you hear a lot about generational cohorts and patronage networks in China in order to maintain and accrue power. And so lately there's been lots of talk about the princelings, one of whom actually came to power. At the peak of power here in the Politburo, we're talking about between 25 and 35 political elites. But there's a Politburo which meets generally regularly, but then there are 9 on the Politburo Standing Committee, so at the very tippy top of the Politburo, and these are the ones with the true power. So as of 2013, the General Secretary is Xi Jinping, who took over from Hu Jintao back in November 2012. And so the Standing Committee of the Politburo, which is really where the power is actually elected by the rest of the Politburo. The Politburo is theoretically elected by the Central Committee of the National Party Congress, which meets annually. So this is the Central Committee, and this is all the Communist Party, so don't confuse this with a legislature or anything, but we're talking about a party system. So the Central Committee meets regularly, but when I say that they elect people to the Politburo, really the people who are running for the Politburo generally run unopposed. It's really risky to rock the boat. So if you're on the Central Committee, you could well be groomed to be the next possible head and go off into the Politburo. And this should remind you a little bit of another party system we've looked at, hopefully, or maybe a couple other party systems. So think about that for a second. So think about Great Britain, right? Where you've got party loyalty, really that trumps the discretion and will of the people. In Japan, the dominant party is also based on informal connections to accrue power. So you've got these various overlaps that come through a mix within the Communist Party system. The key difference being, of course, that there is no democracy, true democracy in China, which makes the whole Communist Party a bit of a farce. The National Party Congress itself is composed of 3,000 members who represent 66 million or so Communist Party members. So that's how many Communist Party members they say are in the country at large. And then these 3,000 people represent them. They meet every 5 years when leaders announce really big changes, the new direction of the state. So this is composed of delegates from the 66 million Communist Party members. The Secretariat of the Communist Party oversees implementation of Politburo decisions. But these are the central structures you need to know. The National Party Congress, which elects the Central Committee, which then elects the Politburo, which then elects the Politburo's Standing Committee. An interesting point down here at the National Party Congress level, the delegates. So the delegates come from the membership. So who are the members? Who becomes a member in the Communist Party? And this is a tough call for any sort of single party state, because you need to balance the reserve of private goods that you have that you can distribute to your members with the notion that you want to have this image that you want to have large scale membership, so it looks like an all inclusive organization. So in some places it's fairly restrictive in terms of party membership. You have to try really hard to get in. In other places they recruit hard because they're looking for representativeness, I guess. Peasants, workers, professionals, scholars, entrepreneurs, even today, which is anathema to communism, but they want entrepreneurs, political business entrepreneurs in here as well, because that is the future of the Communist Party in China, and it's what's keeping the state wealthy and what's keeping them in power. So I'm going to stop here and go to a next slide. Oops, I got to get down here and actually stop it.